big thanks to Napoleon Grills for sponsoring this episode.
What would happen if you dry age a steak for 50 days in mustard? Let's find out. This is what my experiment looks like. A dry aged steak for 50 days, naturally. And this one, dry aged in mustard. Oh, I can't believe it. And this is how it went down. 50 days ago, I picked up this beautiful black Aberdeen ribeye roast with great intramuscular fat. And this is a steak that is well known for its great flavors. It is also a perfect steak for dry aging experiments. I'm gonna cut these steaks into kilogram-sized chunks. That's gonna allow me to get at least 2 good steaks out of this dry aging project. I'm gonna use yellow mustard to brush onto my steak. Basically, I want to form a crust on the outside of this ribeye. What I want out of this experiment is to find out if I can use mustard to enhance the flavors of my steak, therefore making it taste better, making it more tender, and protect it from drying out while I'm actually dry aging this steak. You see, inside one of these dry aging cabinets, there's an environment that extracts moisture from the steak. And I love using mustard to build up a crust on ribeye roasts. The flavors of mustard and ribeye go so well together. So it's only logical to use mustard in a dry aging experiment. Now I'm gonna place this mustard steak next to my reference steak and set it in the dry aging cabinet. And I'm gonna leave it there for 50 days. And after 50 days of dry aging, this is what my project looks like. I got my dry aged steak, which is basically my reference steak, but it's very interesting to look at it and see what happens when you're dry aging for 50 days. Because as you can see, I got a beautiful pellicle that built up on the outside, but we already have a little bit of molding forming, which in itself is not a bad thing and is to be expected when dry aging for 50 days. But if you look at the mustard, it doesn't have any mold. Of course, the crust dried out completely. The color completely changed. The thickness of the crust shrunk down significantly, but I think it looks really good for something that's been sitting for 50 days in a fridge. The first thing that I do to judge my project is to use my nose, and the fragrance that comes off this is very, very promising. I got a bright, fresh mustard fragrance coming at me, and this is something that I'm getting excited about. Now I'm gonna open up the crust and see how it developed. I'm just gonna use a regular kitchen knife to see if I can get some of it off. That mustard almost has a licorice-like consistency. It became fairly hard, but it looks really good still. But what does it look like on the inside? Let's open it up. Wow, this thing became really, really hard. It's almost like cutting into an old cheese. I'm gonna break it open. Wow, this actually looks really, really good. You can see that the outside of the steak oxidized significantly. Of course, this is what you get if you dry age for a long time. Only the core of this steak is still red. So the mustard actually did a good job of protecting the steak from drying out too much. Of course, I want to do a side-by-side comparison with my reference steak so I can actually see if the mustard helped or made it worse. Wow, there's a big difference here. As you can see, the oxidation of the steak is way less than with the mustard. I still have a lot of redness inside my steak and a lot less pellicle on the outside. However, there is a little no-no here at the bottom that crawled inside the fat cap, which means there has been air contact from the outside of the pellicle to the inside of the steak. Now I get a good idea of what the difference the mustard makes. A lot more oxidation inside of the steak. However, it did protect it really well from mold, because the steak on the 50 days, well, we got this little bit of mold, which is kind of disappointing. However, I'm gonna try and fix this, cut off another slice, see if we can get the mold out, because that part we can definitely not eat. If I look at the bottom, I see a clear crack in my steak, and probably in there is where my mold sits. And what's the difference between a good mold and a bad mold? Is the color difference. You can see a green color is starting to form here, which means that's no good. If you have a little bit of mold on the outside, like this white mold for instance, that's no problem. Now I need to cut the green mold away, so I'm just gonna go make steaks and stop when the mold is absolutely totally gone. Now I'm gonna trim the mustard steak. First I'm gonna cut it into real steaks, and then I'm gonna trim off all of the outside, the pellicles, the parts that I don't want to eat. And I find that there's very little pellicle, because I judge my pellicle by how hard it is, not by color. Of course, I've got more discoloration in my mustard, but that doesn't mean it's part of the pellicle. It means that the mustard grew into my steak. Now if I compare the mustard steak to my reference steak, there's a clear difference. I get a lot more yield out of my mustard steak, and it's a lot softer than the dry-aged steak without the mustard crust. So that means I got a nice, soft, dry-aged steak. And even if the mustard has more discoloration, I think it's the better steak for now. Now to cook my steaks, I'm going to be using the Napoleon Kettle Pro grill with my cast iron grill grate. First I'm going to load up my grill with charcoal. Put fire starters in, light them up, and then I'm going to let my charcoal get fully ignited. My charcoal bed is coming up to temperature, and I'm going to put in the grill grate and set it to the lowest position. Then I'm going to let the cast iron grill grate get up to temperature so it has a lot of energy. We can sear off these beautiful steaks. All I need is a quick sear on both sides before I'm going to place these steaks over indirect heat. A nice sear on my steaks, so I'm going to place them over indirect heat and let them come up to temperature. When the steaks hit a core temperature of 54 degrees Celsius, they're done. This is my favorite part of everything. Tasting, finding out if the experiment worked. So let's slice into my mustard steak. And I definitely cooked my mustard steak to the right temperature, but look at how gray it is. That is so typically dry-aged. It still looks absolutely gorgeous, but it's a little gray, but when it oxidizes, it will slowly start turning red. Now let's compare that to the reference steak. Of course, this steak is a lot smaller. And as you know, I like to season my steaks afterwards with a little bit of light sea salt, fleur de sel. Now let's give it a try. First one, the mustard steak. There we go.
Good steak.
I'm really trying to figure out if I can actually taste the mustard.
You gotta try this, Mitchell. You gotta try this.
Oh, whoa. Oh, that's very good.
The steak doesn't taste like steak, and it doesn't taste like mustard. Now I'm gonna try the reference steak.
Seriously, this is way more tender.
This one's definitely a lot milder in flavor. This one's way more intense. I prefer the mustard steak.
The difference is huge. Now, was it worth it putting mustard on a dry steak? If you look at the yield, yes. If you look at the flavor, no. I don't recommend putting mustard on your steak. I'd rather have my regular one. We definitely found someone that's really getting excited about this steak.
I think this is Eva's new favorite because she's going crazy.
Why does it make the mustard steak better than the reference steak? Because personally, I like the reference steak better.
Really?
Yeah.
Because I think this has almost like a caramelized flavor, like it has some sort of sugar in it. Flavor is more intense.
I think this is an important thing that we're touching on, and it happens frequently where one really likes it and the other one says, well, this is not my thing. And I'm always looking for ways to improve on my steaks and add flavors to them or take away flavors or make them juicier or tender. And it's just about understanding what you're doing, and then it also matters what are you going to do with it.
Yeah.
If you're creating a recipe, are the flavors going to mix with this recipe? So for instance, if we make a mustard dried steak with a mustard soup or like a mustard sauce, this could go really well together.
Yeah.
If you want to find all of our recipes, of course you got to go to PitmasterX.com. It's the best barbecue website in the world. It features dogs, especially this one, the barbecue dog. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, then give us a big thumbs up and a comment down below. Hope to see you guys next time. Until then,
Eet smakelijk.
And keep on grilling. Don't worry, we got more steaks right there for Mitchell. And for me, huh? For me too? For you too?
For
You want
everyone.
more? Heva.
You get a steak.
Lekker.
You get a steak.
Everybody gets steak. You're acting like you haven't had steaks in weeks.